Welcome back. In this step, let's look at a couple of tips. The first one is that when I call this dot set state, what it does is a merge with the current state. What does that mean? So if I have a state in here, right? So counter is 0. Now I would want to add another thing to this counter. So to this state, I would want to add another value. How do you separate different values? You would use comma. So counter 0, and let's just say second counter is 100. So the initial state is counter 0 and second counter 100. Over here we are incrementing the counter and only setting the value of counter. What happens to the second counter? Will it become 0? What would happen is that the second counter value will not be modified at all. Whatever object you are passing in here, so only the values which you are passing. So you are passing a counter value. So that counter value is what is taken in and updated. The second counter remains as is. So if you want to see the value of the second counter, what I'll do is count. I'll say second counter, and you can see that the second counter remains 100 even when I increment the first counter. Set state is actually a merge. That's number one. So if I would want to update the second counter as well, I can say second counter and say this dot state dot second counter plus 1. Now all of them get updated. That's number one. Let's get rid of the second counter. Cool. Second counter is out of the equation now, and application is working as it is. The second thing I would want to talk about is the arrow function. Typically, whenever we used functional programming in Java, we have a lambda expression, and similar to that in JavaScript, we have something called a arrow function. We have Node.js installed. So what I'll do is I'll type in node. I'll open up the command prompt or terminal and type in node. You can execute JavaScript code in here. The other option is actually go to console, and over here you can also type in the same code. Let's create a simple list. And how can we create a list? Where list is equal to 1, 2, 3, 4. This is how you define a simple array. And now whenever you would want to do something around this using functional programming, let's say I would want to loop around this and print double the values. So the way I can do that in JavaScript is by saying list dot for each. This is very similar to the for each method which is present in Java functional programming. So you are saying list dot for each value, for each x which is present in here, console dot log 2 into x. So what we are defining here is x arrow. This is equal to and greater sign. This is called the arrow function. So x arrow, what should we do? Be very careful about this syntax. It's list dot for each, e caps. We are opening up a parenthesis, closing the parenthesis here, and between that we are defining the arrow function. The arrow function says for every x, do a console.log of 2 into x. And it prints 2, 4, 6, and 8. So this arrow function is what we are going to look at right now, and look at how it simplifies the need to do a binding. So over here, this is a normal function, right? How do I make it an arrow function? All that I need to do is do a simple change in this. Go over here, and you need to say render is equal to, this indicates that this method no parameters. If this is the case, then do this. What is the advantage of doing this? Let's save this and actually look at the code to see if it's working fine. Yeah, it's running fine in the browser. The advantage of doing this is you would not need to do the binding. With arrow functions alone, you don't really need to do the binding. So if you'd seen right now, oops, I still get the error. Why? Can you think of the reason why I'm still getting the error? Because I've actually changed the render method to an arrow method and not the increment method. Isn't that funny? This is the kind of things which happens when you record a lot of stuff in a single day, right? So now I'm changing the increment method to a arrow function, let's see what would happen. Cool, now this works. So the arrow function prevents the need to do a binding. When you use an arrow function, you don't really need to bind the this variable because the this binding happens automatically. But as far as this course is concerned, we would continue using the usual way because this is how things are done in React documentation as of today. So let's continue doing it the traditional way, which is defining a normal class method. So we'll continue doing that, and we'll continue doing binding throughout this course. So be careful with that. The idea behind this step was to give you a couple of tips. The first one was that set state is a merge. So whatever values you pass to the set state is merged with the existing state. The second thing is if you define an arrow function, then you don't really need to bind the this variable to it. But the disclaimer is in this course we would continue to use normal class ES6 methods. I'm having a lot of fun creating this course, and I'm sure you are having a lot of fun too. I'll see you in the next step. Until then, bye bye.